Pilgrim's
Okay, you're good.
Okay. All right, welcome everybody. Let's go ahead and get started. Thanks for coming to our planning commission meeting this evening. Let's start with a pledge of allegiance. If you all please stand and join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right, we're going to turn the time over to Commissioner Larson for a thought and or prayer.
Yeah, so something's been on my mind lately. It's been in the news. I've loosely been tracking, but that's redevelopment of the soon to be vacated state prison site at Draper. And the name of that development is The Point. And it's all been master planned out, and it's a major development. You know, they talk about all the topics of mass transit and trails connected to the mountains, and 15-minute community where you're 15 minutes from downtown centers, and you know, walkable, bikeable, etc. All these features, right? And it's kind of a greenfield site once they remove the prison facilities and have the opportunity, I guess, to do it right, if you might think of it that way. And all these points that are brought up, I think, are things that we ought to consider and think about as we make planning decisions in this city. It's a different scenario. We have an existing community, but there will always continue to be changes. And you know, we ought to ask ourselves the question: Are we doing it right? Are we thinking long term? Are we considering, you know, all the best interest of the public, you know, within and outside the community? So that's my thought.
Thank you.
Offer a brief prayer.
Sure.
Our Father in heaven, I'm grateful to be gathered in this capacity as public servants and for the opportunity we have to discuss matters at hand here, and pray that we can have our guidance as we do so and make sound decisions for the best interest of the community we serve. And we ask for this in Jesus' name.
Amen. All right. Thank you for that. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. The first item on the agenda tonight is a final site plan for Canyon Point in Centerville, 347 North, 400 East. Just a reminder, this is an administrative decision. It has not been scheduled for a public hearing. The public has spoken about this one in the past quite a bit with some great input on that. So given that, we will turn the time over to Corey.
Thank you, Chair Daly, members of the commission. As indicated, this is a final site plan. And so on this development project, this is the last and final decision in the public process. And then they move to a staff level to begin construction of infrastructure if this is approved. You should be a little bit familiar with it. It's located in the RM zone. It's a mixture of single family and a couple of duplexes, so 4 units in 2 duplexes. That poses the uniqueness of the project because there are standards in the RM zone that apply when you're a duplex or a townhome. And there are standards that don't apply if you're a single family. So we have a mixture of handling those standards, particularly the amount of open space. And so staff has always treated that because multifamily is involved, and we apply the open space parameters of the RM zone for the entire development. We are at final site plan. They have taken a little bit of time. This was approved at a conceptual level last February. There was a significant discussion during that time about drainage, and particularly because this is moving from east to the west. A lot of residents attended during that meeting, particularly focusing some from the Granite Square, because they sit not only downstream, but they also have a rock retaining wall separating the properties. And so there's concern on how that might affect. That's probably what the longest engineering design took place. If you look at the final site plan, it's changed from what you saw at the conceptual. Conceptually, it was going to be in the southwest. Southwest. I have the map turned in my head. Southwest corner, and That was where they acquired some additional land and rezoned it, and the detention was going to be in that corner. As the city looked at the comments, the city engineer went on site with the applicant, as well as I think a couple of residents, if I recall correctly from his comments, and looked at that drainage system. And what they've decided is to shift the far west duplex away from the 400 North, or also known as Parish to some degree, shift that away and put a little smaller detention in this case, and it has an overflow system into the curb and gutter. And so that way, the idea of retaining and seeping and other elements associated with the southerly basin go away. And the city engineer felt like that was the best scenario to protect the properties to the west. So that's the one major change, if you will, is exactly how they're handling the storm water. So it'll be detention. So they're exempted from the retention requirements based on the conditions of the site. And then there's an overflow system into the street to pick up that storm water. So they felt like that was the best scenario. So that basically is the major significant change. Another thing that you see in the site plan design is you see now the addition, due to the different grades, you see the addition of some shorter retaining walls for the most part through the complex, allowing flat areas to be created for the individual units. Staff brings up the concern about a significant one. If you're less than 4 feet, they don't have to be engineered. If you hit 4 feet or higher, they considered structural. They need to be engineered. It is noted on the plan that that wall between the existing home and the new duplex on the east side of the new road or west of the existing home, that's the one that would need to be engineered. Staff is a little concerned because as we deal with walls and fences, typically at property lines, we have a limitation of 6 feet once you enter into the front yard setback. In this case, the front yard setback of that zone is 25 feet. You'll see that the one duplex is located only 20 feet. The side of it is only 20 feet. And so we bring that up also in the staff report. So we have a concern about the retaining walls and their structural and the height of them entering into the front yard setback under the ordinance. And the other point, and we've known this about that duplex, they would like to get the 5-foot reduction, but the RM zone doesn't allow you to have that 5-foot reduction. But this property is in the overlay of the Dual Creek Historic District. And if you qualify for certain architectural elements in that historic setting, you can get an incentive. In the case of new development, your incentive is we'll change some setbacks for you. We just won't reduce the building permit fees. If you have an existing home and remodel, we have a reduction program in your building permit fees also. So they only qualify in the new construction for the setback changes if they qualify. And that's a separate process. It is approved at administrative level in a separate application under the Dual Creek design. So I call that out and say, look, it's 25 feet. You'll have to adjust it if you don't qualify for the incentive change of 5 feet. So I just call that out. So, but it is a different process. For the most part, the project is meeting all the standards other than what I've noted of some concerns. The element that I think is discretionary, subject, design, performance standards, where there is no clear line and demarcation. We know that we have to do the 40% open space to the project. He's provided that calculation and meets the 40%. But there's also a design element about that 40%. The city wanted to get away from just token tot lots in a detention basin. And so now the idea or the performance idea is that you provide open space for the residents you believe are going to look into the community and purchase into the community, try to provide those passive and active areas. And so what's interesting is because we've added that southwest corner property, and then there's a large backyard of that existing home that's going to be assimilated into the entire development project itself. There are some garden boxes, some sitting areas, There's additional gardening going on. There's a beanbag toss court. There's a dog area to run the dogs in. So that's interesting. We haven't seen that much variety integrated. It's usually the swing set syndrome. So as you look at that, you're just making that declaration that they've met the idea of they're providing active and passive space, particularly since when you're dealing with an RM zone and multifamily, you're not creating a traditional backyard to a single family lot. So now, there is a park impact fee that they will pay for the unit for our overall parks. But since they they do lack the yard space around the individual units, that's the purpose of the 40%. Provide some area to go to in exchange for that. Other than that, if you don't have specific questions, staff is recommending approval of the final site plan.
Great. One quick question for you, Corey, just to back up a minute about what you were talking about with the wall, the retaining wall. So condition 2B in the suggested motion, all retaining walls located in the front yard setback area shall not exceed 4 feet in height. So just to clarify that, no retaining walls in the setback can be 4 feet, or just if it's 4 feet or above, we got to engineer it, and we're assuming we're not going to engineer it.
That's a good question for clarity. Anytime you're above 4 feet, it will be engineered no matter where it's placed. But the engineering is measured from the bottom of the wall to the top of the wall. So a lot of people will put some rock down below into the grade and then say it's only a 3-foot wall. That's not how retaining is measured. It'll be the bottom where the footing is to the top of the wall. If you're less than 4 feet, no engineering. There's the other, so that's regardless of where it's placed. Now the issue is encroachment of walls and fences into the front yard. We're trying to maintain the aesthetic appeal, that semi-public visual space of the front yards. We're also trying to make sure that the site triangles of driveways and turn movements of connecting roads, driveways, and streets meet a site triangle. And so we're trying to leave that below that 48-inch level, as the code actually says 48 inches. So,
okay.
So hopefully that a little more clear.
Yeah. So in this case, it's going to be 20 or 25 feet, depending on
whether they qualify.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks. Does anybody else have any questions for Corey?
But Corey, didn't you say that in that one case of the house facing parish, it would be greater than 4 feet, the wall?
It appears on the west side of the existing house, or east side of the new duplex, it says to be engineered. So we're assuming, and I think I saw a plan that had a 6-foot demarcation on it.
6.5 retaining wall.
Yeah.
So in that case, it'd be engineered, but it sounded to me like you were explaining that we were trying to keep them all below 4 feet for sightline issues and other.
Once you enter that front yard setback.
Yeah. So you can be taller than 4 feet. Yeah.
Behind it, you can, until you hit our hillside zone, we have a limitation on cuts and fills, but outside the hillside, they could go 6 feet, 7 feet, whatever the structural allowance would be on the design. Hopefully this ground doesn't require a 10-foot cut.
Hopefully.
I had a couple other questions. If you could go back to the grading plan, shows the retention. So, Corey, you explained that the building on the west side of the entry road facing parish was shifted back to create that retention zone there, and whereas before it was behind the building, is that right?
Yeah, it'd be south of the
Next
building.
page. Yeah, you can zoom in on that. Yeah, west side there. Anyway, sorry. So it jumped to the other side of the building, basically, or adjacent to the sidewalk. It's about a 5-foot drop, top to bottom. It's a pretty steep hole right there next to the sidewalk. I don't love that idea. I know it's got to go somewhere, and ideally you want it near the curb. But I wonder if some adjustment can be made so that it's a little more gradual of of a dish than a steep one. I mean, you could fall in that.
Yeah, this was the engineer and the applicant. I think you make a good aesthetic and a user standpoint along the sidewalk. Is there room to adjust that? Certainly there's room to adjust it.
I think,
I don't know what the grade on those. You're right, it's
I
fairly.
presume it has numbers on them, but
Yeah.
yeah.
so I bring this question up a lot in my work. And if it's greater than 30 inches away from the flat space, so if your cliff or your drop off is greater than 30 inches, you're not required any railing. If it's closer than 30 inches, then you're required to have a railing.
I think you're right.
So this doesn't appear to be closer than 30 inches. I don't particularly agree with that ruling, but that's what governs it. And I argued
Yeah.
it a lot. But because you could simply just put like a split rail fence right there and feel safer.
Yeah, I mean, there's a safety element. There's also just the aesthetic elements. There's a giant hole next to the sidewalk.
That's what all detention is. It's-
Yeah,
it's
but I
hard
mean,
to-
some are steeper and some are more shallow, I guess is what I'm saying. This is pretty extreme.
Yeah, I
Do we
think-
have any code that requires it to be less than 3-to-1? 3-to-1 is the maximum.
I don't know on the detention ordinance. On a typical grade, we have a 3-to-1 for standard slope and a 2-to-1 on a retaining. When you go 8-foot cut and you do a 10-foot cut, 8-foot retaining, you can go, I think, to a 2-to-1
Mhm.
on that. But I don't know on the detention, but I think you make some good points. The applicant maybe can look at it. I know that if we enter the realm of the safety issue, if it qualifies, you do have to put up that safety barrier, but I don't remember the number off the top of my head, so I'm gonna go with your 30 inches.
Other than the culverts in the bottom of that, is the expectation that's gonna be grass? We can ask the applicant that in
Yeah.
a minute.
I know that he's not done grass everywhere purposely.
Right.
Who will maintain this detention facility?
Right now, because it's not coming to you as a subdivision, is a single lot with a single owner. So whoever the owner of the property is will be the responsible maintenance. But there is an intention on the applicant's part to do a planned unit development, which is different than the PDO. Conversion plat, so that each individual unit can be sold. And then they'll participate in an HOA, and then it would transfer under the subdivision approval
To the
to
HOA?
the HOA, CCNRs.
Okay.
But until then, whoever owns this large piece of development and constructs it,
Has to maintain it.
thanks for finishing, I couldn't finish the word.
Yeah, that should be clarified. The fact that it's not green here indicates maybe it's not grass, but it's not clear. To the south of that,
Look at that
detention
landscaping
area.
plan, remember?
sorry,
There's a landscaping plan that's a
It just
little
says
more-
grass
Yeah.
on the landscape.
buffalo grass, Kentucky grass, bluegrass.
so behind that duplex one, there's this hatched area shown, and I couldn't find anywhere it tells us what that is. There's rock retaining north of that, but that hatched area is unclear. On the landscaping plan, it's not shown at all. So I don't know
Say
what
it
that.
again, where you're talking about?
The hatch.
It's hatched.
Yeah, along the property line, the west property line.
If I remember, that was intended to capture some of the surface water, move it over the detention, but I think the
So maybe-
applicant can tell you.
Maybe rock rubble, something like that. Anyway, again, it's just not clear what that is.
It's planting trees in there.
Again, if you go to the landscaping sheet, it doesn't show it at all. It's just some shrubs along there.
Tree.
I have a question. Do we allow artificial turf?
You're in,
They just got it for the dog area though.
you're in the discussion that the council had that has not been decided. If it gets counted under our stormwater management as impervious, then you can't plant the landscaping. So the discussion at the council is, what do we want to do about artificial turf? Because there's a difference between buying green carpet at Home Depot and calling it artificial turf versus correctly installing it, which it would, in theory, enter into the ground. So that Decision has not been fully made. They recommended staff go back and discuss that and come back, if I recall correctly. The other thing they brought up is they want to have a discussion that if it's allowed, is it 100% or is it a percentage?
Is that-
And
Sorry, go ahead.
Commissioner Sagrud helped that
Is-
argument.
Is that in the zoning code? Is that something we'd see?
It's not. Impervious is under the municipal code under stormwater management.
Okay.
And what our zoning code says, is you cannot exceed a certain impervious surface amount. And that's where the undefined place comes. You could call it pervious, installed correctly. You could count it as pervious if it's creating excess runoff. So unclarity on whether you could actually install artificial turf.
With the architectural approval with the overlay that would allow them to have the 5 feet a leeway for the setback, how long is that process?
It's done by the zoning administrator. So
So you?
knowing how well that zoning administrator works, it could be months on end. No, it's actually a fairly easy review. There are 10 items identified by the Landmarks Commission in that program, and they have to do 4 of them.
Okay. So
And
is it?
And it's
usually
most
pretty-
likely it'll be approved under the existing
Attainable?
architecture.
It's usually attainable.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Anything else? Matt, did you get all your questions answered?
Yeah, I mean. So, I mean, I don't know how much leeway we have at this point. But the change to move the detention to that side of the building as opposed to south of it. What was that driven by? You sort of explained that, but I don't remember.
There's 2 things that are coming into play. One is the state has adopted new parameters for retention versus detention. And the base parameter is you will retain your water. But there are exceptions based on the conditions and soils and the drainage that can move you out of the category of retention and put you into the category of detention. So that was one of those discussions. And it's influenced on the conditions. It was influenced by the grade at Granite Square is significantly below this project. So if the water is retained in the percolation, wherever that may go to, could create a problem to
Flooding
Granite Square
basements.
flooding.
Yeah.
And if you calculated your storm water amount generated, we know that we're not calculating to the worst storm ever. Calculating to a reasonable level. I don't remember if it's the 25 year or the 50 year, but we're calculating at that. And then there's always a potential for that overflow to come into play. And so the issue became is if we require the detention and it exceeds that storm level, there was, 1, subsurface coming out, 2, spilling over the top. So the city engineer said, no, let's move it to the other side, reduce the size because we're not retaining anymore. So we're detaining that flood amount, but it'll be able to overflow into the city's street, and that becomes the bailout on an overflow. So it's a two-prong approach to justify moving to detention.
Thanks for explaining.
So Corey, just to Commissioner Larson's point about how much leeway we have here, I mean, at this point, the motion before us, which we don't have a motion yet, but will be, I guess, in a minute, is to accept approve, whatever, adopt. I can't ever get the words right, but the final site plan. If we don't, maybe we decide that this is significantly different from the conceptual site plan. Does this start over?
So let's address the latter first, the start over scenario. If you determine that it is not substantially in compliance with its conceptual approval, then you can motion it be tabled and corrected to match what you believe needs to be done for the conceptual level, and they can come back and address why what they did or didn't do, or what is needed to justify that. If you determine that it's still, or if you determine, or if they determine, look, I don't want to go that route, yes, they would start back to the conceptual and amend their application at the conceptual level, and we relook at conceptual for any changes and why those changes need to take place, and then house the public hearing and then come back. So it's a two-pronged thing. It could be corrected or it could start over. The second one, or the prior one, talking about how much leeway do you have to move, there's not a lot of room that says this is how your detention is supposed to be placed. So we can point to that code. But what you can do, in my mind, is say, one, I want to table it and look at it, and is it a safety matter? And if it is a safety matter, what are the standards? So back to the discussion, if it's less than 30 inches, what are you going to do to mitigate that safety matter? Or you could add the condition that be checked for any safety and mitigated with the safety measure acceptable for the detention.
Okay, thanks for that. I wanted to make sure that it was understood, especially on the commission, what the next steps were, given some of the questions that had been raised and whatnot. I mean, we're not to that point in the discussion yet, but me personally, I feel like the design that we see now, the retention in the location that it's now, is better than in the back corner. But, you know, I don't know that I want it to start over because of some of those questions we got. So
In reality, they changed it because the city asked them to change it. So it's kind of hard to go back to them and say, well, change it back.
I think, yeah, it's a combination of city residents, public hearing process generated that discussion.
yeah. Okay. No, that's fine. Like I said, I just wanted to make sure that it was understood what the expectations and next steps might be or could be. So, any other questions? Yeah.
One question, when you calculated the hard surface percentage, did that include the turf area? How was it treated?
It's based on their percentage of landscaping, they said 40%. So if you're looking at the artificial turf, the answer is it should not include that.
So it's considered an impervious surface according to this calculation.
I guess that's the question. It's considered pervious. Should it be
That's a
part
call
landscape?
of the public works director to decide when it crosses the threshold of violating the impervious definition. So I wouldn't say it's 100% prohibited. I would say it's in that area that a different entity gets to say, is it impervious or not?
Right.
And right now, in the discussion of the council, the public works director says, I'm okay with some artificial turf, but it needs to be installed correctly. Then that generated the discussion. Is it a permit? Who's reviewing it?
Who
Who's
approves it?
enforcing it? Who's approving it? And that's
Who
where I'm,
inspects it?
How big before you have to.
Right. My question is, when it was calculated, how was it treated here?
in his calculations, he's including all of the landscape and common area in his 40.
So it is in this calculation considered a permeable surface.
That's what he's arguing.
Fair enough.
Whether the Public Works will approve it that way is a
Right.
different story.
I just wanted to understand how
Now,
the
the
math was.
second thing that could be done is, if you remember at the conceptual, you can reduce it from 40%, but no less than 30 based on the merit of an argument being made. So that's another option to be looked at if you're uncomfortable with the applicant. You could table and say, go back and address it, because they can come and ask for the 40% be waived up to or down to 30%, but no less than.
You good? Any other questions? for-
I just have a quick, sorry. Is this a private street? I'm thinking the answer is yes.
The answer, yes, this is a
And
private.
so on private
maintained
streets,
street.
they don't have to have park strips.
Correct. They just have to have sidewalk on both sides, or one side can be altered based on a pathway design.
And so this has like sidewalk on both sides partially. And then,
And then the argument made at conceptual was there are no units on the north side.
that face it,
that face it, so
so
the,
it's okay.
So where you, nobody's walking there.
And then I noticed that in their landscape plan, the park strip that is on Parish and 400 East isn't included in their landscape.
no,
And why?
because park strips are on the public property, not counted on-site landscaping. So there's two parts to the zoning code. The first part is that anytime you're on a public street, there is a landscape amount required. And so if you're, so you have a park strip and a sidewalk and in the collector streets like 10 feet.
Mhm.
And so that, you can include your sidewalk into that. Arterial is like 15 feet and, or not, collector is, and then like Parish Lane is 20 feet. So we do have that standard, but on-site landscaping is defined. And on-site is on the property, so the 40% is on.
Yes, but
property.
I'm just saying
So-
some damage might come to the, if there is landscape there already or isn't, and will they be installing a landscape when they walk away and finish? Not that it would go towards their calculation, but
Yes.
what's going to
Public,
happen?
public improvements are required in their construction
And
drawings.
you're not required to see what those would be.
No, because there's options to do in the park strip. You
Okay.
don't have to do grass.
Right,
The-
Right,
So,
but you don't have to see them or approve them or know what they
no,
are.
that'll be under their improvement permit. Yeah. Now, we also say, technically, we say trees don't go into the park strip unless otherwise approved, and
Mhm.
here's the species type.
Christina,
I was just gonna get clarification on the sidewalk, the half-day sidewalk. She did it.
she
Sorry, I
beat you
said
to
that.
it. That's all right. Anything else? Anybody?
Last question is, has to do with the street itself, and questions were raised before about snow stack along there. And that there's not really any place to push it, other than just along the side. So I noticed, not on this plan we're looking at, but the other, it shows some parking spaces along the road, parallel parking. So I assume the idea is that park lane just becomes snow stack.
Seems like you could push that into the pond, the detention pond.
Yeah, that's, since it's privately maintained, we don't have an ordinance that says you have to provide snow storage areas. If they push it out into the public street, they're violating the ordinance. So the HOA or the owner, depending on where it goes from here in the future, will just be figuring out how to remove the snow.
And it seems like with this location of that detention pond, it's a better place for it than back in the corner.
You're just pushing it a long way from the one end of the road to that.
We
Sure.
don't get snow.
It can be done. I mean, there's,
Yeah, that's true. It doesn't snow.
It stops.
well, yeah, no longer an issue.
One, that raises one question for me. It's private garbage collection. Is that bins or dumpsters?
He had that discussion with Mark, our street supervisor, and they know they have to provide it. We don't drive onto their street and do it. So the plan that was by the applicant was they'll do individual cans with a private company.
All right. You sure? It's okay. All right. Anybody else?
No, this is good.
Yeah, it's good.
Getting dirty on the sleeves.
Like I said, nobody can ever accuse this planning commission of just rubber stamping, so. All right, let's go ahead and move along then to the next part of this discussion, and we'll invite the applicant to come forward and speak. If you'd introduce yourself and maybe address some of these questions we've brought up, and especially all the ones that Commissioner Larson has had, so. Just kidding.
I don't know why I get special attention. But
Yeah, thanks for having me again. So, no, a few things that you
And
brought up.
Sorry, real quick,
Oh,
introduce yourself.
Chad Morris, developer,
Thank you.
resident of Centerville. So the retaining wall, that was one thing that was brought up and back. That is actually, I think I heard 6.3, it's actually 5.3, but nonetheless, yeah, so it's a retaining wall that will need to be engineered there on the east side of that duplex between the existing house. Let me see. Oh, the hatched area. Someone brought up that area on the far west side. That's actually a mound to kind of push water towards, like, any excess water that goes past gutter or whatnot towards the detention pond is what that is. So,
Is it grass?
yes, it's just kind of ties in. It's just the same. It's just showing that it's a mound. So yes, it's grass. Yeah. Let's see here. What else we have?
Sorry,
Oh,
can we go back to the wall, the retention wall?
Yeah.
In the setback, there's no issue with bringing that down to the 4 feet in the setback.
in the setback, I don't know. I don't believe so. In fact, the engineer, I'll double check with that, but I assume, I mean, because we are okay with, because that's 10 feet off the sidewalk, right? And so it could be, I mean, pulled out 5 feet and then just pulled down a little bit and taken down to 4. I don't see that being an issue, because at the exit or the corner of far south or a northeast corner where those meet, that is 5 feet. I think, is that correct? Is that what it says? 5 feet on that plan, or for that?
6.5 is what I'm reading, but maybe reading it wrong.
Let me look
It's a
here.
bit blurry.
I think you may be looking at the old one. Let's see, before the changes came, let me double check here.
That's what I saw on mine too. was 6'5".
6'5".
You zoom in on that area.
This was the latest that was sent to me, as I recall.
Yeah, it says 6.5 feet retaining wall.
Let's see. I spoke to the engineer, and the engineer did get it down to right about 5 feet. So that is something that we can adjust. I had thought that I sent you the updated plan, but in fact, I can forward it to you as well. Yeah. So in the one that I have that we thought we sent to you, it actually is 5 feet at that corner, and then 5.3 behind duplex 2 is what it is. And that's something that we had discussed in the staff meeting, going over these changes. Let's see. But yeah, so that just kind of clears that a little bit. But yeah, so I don't assume that there'd be problems dropping that to 4 on that area over there, just the setback.
Front yard setback, yeah.
So, and I was trying to understand what you're saying, Corey, is that, so that is required it to be 4 feet? Because a lot of what you were talking about was per the street view and triangle view.
Once you enter the defined setback, so
Yeah.
that's the discussion of 20 or 25, you will drop it to 4 feet. And so, because no walls or fences to be 4 feet, but that doesn't stop you from tiering it 2 feet at a time.
Okay. That makes sense. So I don't see any issue with that based on that and any, yeah, so. Right another. So we've got that, and then let's see, the detention pond. I guess I understand your concern a little bit. However, I look at it and I think, okay, we are 3 feet off of that. And then it's kind of more of a gradual step down, which where you're saying it does get to it's about 5-6 feet difference to that center. But that's again also about 20 feet back from the sidewalk. So again, in a safety standpoint, someone would have to get some pretty decent speed on a wheelchair or something to get across the 3 feet and then down. I guess I'm trying to understand where that
A kid on his bike could just launch it.
seriously, right?
Yeah.
Kid on his bike can launch it. So, but there are actually a lot of areas they could launch anyway. There's a huge retaining wall just south of us. So, so I don't know. I understand a little bit of your concern, but it does, in my view, seem fairly gradual after the 3 feet, that I don't think it should be a concern, a significant one at least. So,
And what do you anticipate the composition of that?
On the grass, you're saying?
Will it be grass?
Yes, in the landscaping plan, it does state grass.
Okay.
So I'm open if you guys decide you want to change it to something different. I think grass would probably be,
I think grass is forgiving.
yeah, that's kind of what.
Are
I
you
was
gonna do
thinking.
like a fancy water loving grass or a fancy water repelling grass? You know, like, cause they have
All
those,
fancy.
I
you
don't
have
know.
those bio native grasses that just, they get watered once a week, you mow it once a summer or not, and they're just like the tall meadow grass.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I haven't, I'm assuming something probably more like that because it's not.
it's
it
just,
could
I
be
would
played
imagine it
on.
would be tricky to mow that. thing.
Yeah,
Usually I don't like to mow anything that's steeper than 3 to 1. Really,
That's
a little
what
steeper
is
than-
showing 36.56%.
Shows 36.5.
So you're just more than 3 to 1.
yeah, you're a little
Yeah,
more
and
than
I
3 to
think-
1.
I
Can you
believe-
get steeper than 3 to 1 and then you roll your mower,
yeah.
right? So I just don't.
And I believe the engineer actually considered that.
Yeah.
When they did that, but in terms, I'm with you, and I don't know if that'll be a significant area for playing. I assume not.
You just do
I
a
don't-
foam pit there. I mean.
You're right.
Foam pit, yes.
In fact, just suck up something, maybe not even foam.
I
but
don't
the
think
beads,
stormwater
the diaper
is
beads
that's
that just
approved in a
suck up
stormwater
with
detention
our diaper
facility.
beads.
I don't
So,
think
yeah. Anyway, so we got that. I'm trying to think. Yes, artificial grass. I mean, it will be installed correctly, but again, if that's something you just decide, hey, we want regular grass, it's just give me the word. It's not a big deal.
I have a
So,
question about the dog. Are you gonna fence in the dog park?
yes,
Just
it's a
the dog
park.
outline, like this. Just,
Correct.
okay.
Yeah, and the reasoning for the dog park is we kind of figured this is again an empty nester type of area, and so we thought there's a lot of empty nesters that have animals, pets, dogs, and so it's a good area to be able to take them there without, or send a grandkid out to a dog, to that area. Hey, go play with a dog, rather than walking down Parish.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Where else am I here? Oh, I think you asked about the parking strip. I don't know. I mean, my guess is right now I'm just with everybody else. We're kind of looking a little more water conservative. So my thought is we'll probably have rocks, but I haven't looked into that. We're not gonna have trees. Okay, we'll go with the city guidance on the parking strip too. So, I think that was about it. Did I hit everybody's questions?
I think so.
Can I have another?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just curious,
Yeah.
how are you going to provide water for the people who use the garden boxes? Like, are you gonna put a spigot in each one? You're gonna have one spigot and make them drag a hose? How are you gonna,
We're actually going to provide buckets.
you're gonna make them go down in the
I'm
well?
kidding, I'm kidding. They just carry it from their house. No,
We gotta dig their own well.
I haven't thought that far, and that's not really what I'm not dealing too much with the landscaping, but yeah, there's going to be hose spigots there that I'm assuming probably at least one. It's not a huge area, so it's not. I mean, put a hose down that you run it down, and then I don't really too bad, but I don't necessarily think it'd be bad to have two, one on each side.
Curious.
So no, it's a good question. Sorry about my joke.
No, it's fine. I'm sure.
Just don't make it culinary.
Just don't make it culinary.
All right.
Anybody else? Any questions for Mr. Morris?
Okay, wait, I have.
Yeah.
So on the very furthest east, building, I'm just curious, you probably don't know the answer because you've already said you weren't too involved in the landscape, but on the east side of that house, you have a very large shrub bed and then you have a grass bed. And I'm just thinking that's a really big shrub bed. So a lot of places for weeds to grow, like
On the very,
Okay.
On Fourth East.
on Fourth East, on the very east.
On the
Yeah.
very east side.
Yeah, because like if I'm like thinking, oh, well, I might want to live here, I don't know.
Okay, the east side of the duplex or
This-
the exist.
No.
The
The
home
proposed
fence.
unit 6.
Oh, unit 6, okay. I-
Yeah, and that is that's the most significant open space that anybody could have, and you've dissected it in half. Food for thought.
That is a good question. I know we wanted some kind of space like that tree there for kind of just buffer a little bit from the road.
I like to keep like foundational plantings to like 3 feet or less, so that they can have more space for doing, but
It's a good
once you
question.
get into a flower bed that's greater than 3 feet, you can't reach all the weeds. Then you have to get in it. The functionality is just real hard. So just do me a favor and just ask Mr. Dan Loveland what his theory was behind that, and make him prove it to you that it was a good idea.
Well, and I don't know, maybe Corey, you could tell me how much leniency there is to adjusting things as we're on the fly, as long as we've hit the major issues. Are we okay to adjust things like that on the fly? Like, oh, this is too big, let's reduce this a little bit. I've never done the landscaping like this before, and so I'm not sure of that question. Does it have to be 100% meeting this? If we see, this actually doesn't make sense, can we just come to you guys real quick and say, hey, can we make a quick change here? I don't know this.
Well, you're dealing with city government, quick changes, relative speaking. The answer is a yes and a no. If it is a specific requirement and condition of approval of the planning commission, it has to return to the commission. Staff is not authorized to redo it. If it's a unspoken compliance issue, and again, I'm going off the ordinance, we don't require turf.
Yeah,
So it can be a site plan amendment at administrative level, as long as it still meets the code. You're not reducing it above the code. So it really depends on how the approval is structured.
so as long as we mostly hit the shrub counts, the tree counts, that type of thing, if we take some.
Yeah, that's
shrub
what
out,
staff
it's
will
not
look at,
gonna
is
be a
if you're
big issue.
eliminating something, is it dropping below the standard?
Yeah,
And 2, is it something specific that the planning commission put as a condition for a purpose? We can't substitute our opinion for that
that
purpose.
makes sense.
That's 100 my opinion.
I'm just looking at the cornhole area. What is to the west of that? I know there's like some places to sit, and then they'll, That's a-
Gazebo type of thing?
Yes, it's a
Gazebo.
gazebo type of thing there.
And would there be, I'm just, as a food for thought again, is there space instead of a cornhole court to do a pickleball court?
We thought of the pickleball court, however, the landscaper that we used, which, and I've also heard this from others, has kind of said that the problem with pickleball courts right now is there's so much noise with that. Yeah, pop, 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 that it can kind of be an issue to neighbors, and where this is, again, more of the idea of an empty nester, where we also have more empty nesters to the west of us. That was kind of the reasoning we didn't do pickleball court. I initially brought, let's do pickleball court, everybody look pickleball court. But that, and I understood their reasoning, like, yeah, you're right. So,
I would argue they would probably still appreciate that in that age group, but you can obviously do what you want there, so.
no, I think they would, but I think more of like a rather than in the middle of a neighborhood, like a park area is kind of my thought. But my in-laws have them, and I do love playing.
My prediction is it'll be a horseshoe pit.
My prediction is it's gonna be a weed pit. If it's cornhole, it's gonna be weed pit and it's not gonna be used. But that's
I'm
what I
using
would-
it.
I would
I love
say.
cornhole. Coming over, I'm making friends. We're having
With all the
tournaments.
senior citizens
Yeah,
there.
betcha.
So my question is, could you summarize the HOA plan, and then is the existing building going to be part of it?
The existing building is planning on being part of that HOA plan. I don't have an HOA plan I can give you right now.
Well, I mean, just in broadest terms,
It's going to encompass all that, in the sense of what, are you talking about, like open space?
No.
Open space is going to incorporate.
just procedurally, you're gonna divide this out. You'll do an amended plat. You'll create an HOA, and then every single one is going to be part of it, including the existing house.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, that's the plan.
Any other questions? Heidi?
No.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, as I stated before, this one is not scheduled. There's no public hearing for this. So we're back to the commission to discuss, make a motion and discuss the motion, or any other questions we have for staff. Who's got thoughts or a motion?
Okay, my thought is, so long as he can get that wall, that's a question. And if we feel like 2B covers it, I kind of feel like 2B covers it.
I feel like 2B
Yeah.
covers it. Yeah.
And the 5-foot setback for me was a big deal, but sounds like that he can get that with the architectural.
With 2A.
The incentive.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a fifth. That's like, it's a significant amount more that he needs to get there. So as long as that's able to be done, then I think that's covered too.
Right. So 2A and 2B kind of cover those two problems, issues. Yeah. Okay.
I like that he took the consideration about the flooding of the residents to the west and found a solution that the city engineer is comfortable with. I thought that was very considerate.
I'm interested to see how that's going to be managed with the duplex being a 2-person, likely 2 different
Do you
people.
think that maybe he could have, the plat would be split right down the middle of the building and those would be 2 parcels?
Sure. I think that's the anticipation. Yeah.
That's cool. You do that all the time, twin homes, right?
Yeah.
Same kind of concept.
Just the management of it is going to be solely on that one.
Well, no, it'd be the HOA.
The HOA.
The HOA manages.
He said that it was going to be with, the responsibility was going to be on the property owner. who
Right
had-
now is constructed till they convert it.
Yeah, until
Oh,
they,
okay.
The whole project is one.
it's one owner now, but once it gets.
Oh, I was super confused by that. I was like, who would want to take that lot? Like, that's not a good idea.
It'll be the HOA.
All right, perfect.
Okay. Any other discussions? Comments?
I also like how he added landscaping with the existing building, because a lot of times when we see these, sometimes they use existing buildings sort of to bonus their density, and I don't appreciate that, but he's incorporated that into the actual plan, creating landscaping, usage, and making it flow with the rest of the plan instead of just saying, oh, and then there's this house that we didn't want to touch. So I appreciate that because it also doesn't get rid of the house. It takes into consideration building materials and then incorporates it actually into the plan.
All right. I'll make a motion and we can discuss that motion if we need to. So I hereby make a motion for the planning commission to approve the final site plan for Canyon Point in Centerville development, located at approximately 347 North 400 East, subject to conditions 1 through 4 in the staff report with suggested reasons for action A through F.
Second?
Great. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that motion? Okay, then let's start down on this end. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
That motion passes. Thanks, everyone. That was good discussion. Covered a lot of ground on that one. Okay, let's move on to the next item on our agenda. This one has been scheduled for a public hearing. This is for a plan development overlay amendment for the Parish Creek Business Park at 1160 North 950 West. And it is a legislative decision. So we'll turn the time over to Corey.
Thank you, Chair Daly. Members of the commission, as indicated, this is a legislative decision. And what's happening with this particular application is the Parish Creek Business Park is an industrial high zone and currently has a planned development attachment to it. So it did receive a PDO approval in the long past. The project consisted of, I think it was 4 lots. You're seeing 2 of the lots are developed on the southern end of the project. And there are 2 additional lots to the north that are currently undeveloped. The applicants provided you the narrative of what's happened during the time in marketing and the design of the project. We've had some preliminary discussions in the past with these 2 lots, but in summary, really close is that they see the market changing and what they're trying to accomplish with the business park from its original approval. And second, there were 4 buildings slated for lots 2 and 3. So we had some buildings fronting on I-15. I believe it was just 1 building and some parking fronting Legacy Highway. The idea of kind of a 2-part project was we have 2 freeway frontages. I-15 is the traditional west side industrial high zone. This entire property was in the industrial high zone, but the PDO had some reasonings behind it. There was a dead end street that couldn't go beyond 400 feet. And so the idea, and then we had some wetlands associated with the development area. So the idea was, how do we get around the long dead end cul-de-sac? Well, you can vary the standards of the subdivision ordinance if we do something in a better integrated design to the project. And so what was proposed is we'll allow you to go the longer cul-de-sac, but we're going to do a wider road. So now we have a 2-lane road entering in and out of that business park at a terminus cul-de-sac that exceeds the 400-foot length. And the concept behind that is that if we had an incident on the east side, that road could be shut down. We still have 2 lanes for exiting on the other side and vice versa. So that was one of the changes to, is we have a much larger boulevard street than our standard zone would occur, and we designed around that. The second idea was an enhanced building design. So you see the 2 existing tilt-up buildings in their design was approved. And then we had kind of this split orientation. You had the I-15 industrial, but across the Legacy Highway is a Shorelands Commerce Park. And so what happened in the landscaping design was to do more campus, formal, industrial business park design as you come into the project. But by the time you reach the Legacy Highway, which is really involving the lots in question right now, you could use that landscaping design to orient to I-15, but we wanted to do a more shorelands theme to the west, which is a little bit more rougher, for lack of better terms. It's an upland environment, landscaping. It's not a formal turf and grass. And so the idea was that buildings would look a little different with their landscaping. So they're going to be the same in their design, but we'll have 2 faces occurring to the 2 different highways. The argument that the petitioner makes is not only a market change, but some of that rough landscaping, the wildflower landscaping, the wild plants taken over by some of the wetlands. And it hasn't been the most successful landscaping design from their standpoint as an end user. Additional problem that came in, probably the major impetus for changing it is those buildings on lots 2 and 3, although reviewed at the time by the city and submitted to all the entities, apparently with the amount of water, the cul-de-sac, the access, there's a limited square footage that they're going to allow, which is less than what their conceptual plan originally had shown. My discussions with them, they can probably repeat it to till you're done hearing from them, is that they still want an option to get an additional building if they can overcome the fire marshals and the fire codes determination. So rather than have the 3 or 4 additional buildings, they would just have the 2 buildings between the 2 lots, but that won't be approved. And so they're thinking in the future is if they can overcome that hurdle, they still want to have space for a building footprint if and when that occurs. But until then, this market need change and looking at their end users, the proposal now is without that building to take the west lot and now combine lots 1, 3, and 4 together into one large lot. And they can explain their reasoning, but it appears from staff that the issues of parking and the different users, so it's not all just office and warehouse. With large warehouse space, you're having a mixture in the market that actually drives up the counts of parking. And so they'd like to incorporate those into one large lot. So now we'll just have two, the building that's on the east side, and then the building on the west side will be incorporated to the north. They'll build additional parking. That parking can be shared now because it's on-site parking. And they also want the option to use the parking area as a storage space if some individuals want to have some material storage, like Intermountain Solar, I believe, is a user on the current complex, and they may have some storage needs, and so they'd like to have a flex space with that parking lot. So it would add additional parking. It add also possibility of storage. Then they would have a building on the east side, which was kind of already planned. And then they would have the parking reconfigured for that area and have a fleet parking area for some trucks or some buses like we have at the Bluebird bus sales and repair facility. I'm not saying Bluebird's going over there. I have no idea, but it's a fleet vehicle parking area. So that's the basic parameters of the plan that they'd like to do. We've had a few discussions with them on the design. One of the things that I've mentioned is we need to make sure that we are consistent with the PDO expectations, that we do something better than the standard zoning. I think for the most part, they're keeping the PDO originality in place with the building design. You're seeing a shift in the landscaping. I'm comfortable in my mind that if we go to a more formal landscaping, it's probably okay because we're not actually into the upland environment of the Shorelands Commerce Park. So hanging my hat on that didn't seem to be something to have worries that we're downgrading. But the storage area, they can probably tell you I've thrown the beanbag at the beanbag court at them a dozen times, and we've gone the rounds with the storage area because the idea is if they can get a building, ripping out a really nice wall and screening that's above the IH zone element would be rather expensive. And so they propose the chain link with slats so that they can do a takedown. They provided you two options. One, use the existing landscaping areas as the buffer to that storage area. And option two is to add some additional landscaping surrounding the parking so that you have a visual buffer and separation of the parking lot area. As you drive down Legacy, you'll see some landscaping buffer on the west side. You'll see some landscaping onto the east side, and that would buffer the chain link and slat area. So I think that's the genesis of their changes. From a staff standpoint, they're maintaining the majority of the expectations overall. I do, again, punch a little hard on the chain link issue. I understand their reasoning behind it, but staff also has to come under the belief that this is a long-term situation, particularly if they can't overcome the fire codes. And so now we have this balance between having that option. And I think option B or option two, I don't remember what it's called, proposal two, with the landscaping is a pretty good compromise in that kind of concept because we do have landscaping and buffering. I went as far as my recommendation to say, fine, if we're going to use chain link and slats, let's use a vinyl and upgraded slat fencing design. I'm mixed bag on it. It looks really great up front. But if you do a vinyl covered, over a long period of time, it does deteriorate. If the
Like
UV
you're saying covering the chain link in vinyl.
and vinyl with
Okay.
a more natural, natural tone or something like that. I
Natural
think
tone.
my report said. it's kind of like the black signals. They're first installed versus the galvanized look of the street signals. They look great. Over time, they do wear down, and over time, you're just painting them. They're powder coated. And then as they get scratched up and weather beaten and faded, you're just back to painting them with the black to match. So they do look nice, but I still think I can't, as a staff, say 100% give up the shoreland. So I'm going after the landscaping and going after a little bit of an upgraded screening fence without maybe getting a very expensive screening fence. So there are some missing elements on the conceptual. You'll see in there. This is the balance between, okay, the conceptual plan is not a perfected plan. We're trying to see if it's feasible for you to do it. We can apply conditions for you feasibly to accomplish that. But we also, this is a PDO. So this becomes kind of their custom document of what they're going to build. And we're going to look at that document as they come in with the final site plan to make sure that we're accomplishing that task. So now we're sitting in this middle. There's some missing elements on the landscaping plan. There's some not fully understanding all the end users for the parking, but we have a lot of parking if you combine the lots. So I think I'm going to let the commission weigh in how comfortable you are overall. They can be tied up at the final site plan. A lot of this can be redefined and handled at final site plan. I think the question you have to ask is there anything in here that is a shortcoming that would make you question that it could be accomplished? If it does, then seek those answers. If not, so staff took the position we can probably do it with a final site plan. So we're recommending approval with a number of conditions.
Okay. Thanks, Corey. Anybody have any questions for Corey?
So for the outdoor storage, what are the limitations that we need to consider? Because if I remember right, the outdoor storage needs some kind of screening. Does it just have to be vinyl slatting in industrial high?
Yes, industrial high, you're in the IM zone, it has a different set of standards. In the IH and the IVH, it's permitted. But if you go to the special regulations of the industrial chapter, they do allow on the base zone chain link with slats as a screening option of outdoor storage areas. I'm making the argument is, yes, that's a base zone, but this is a PDO. Where do we draw the line that, because you are accomplishing your base zone objectives. The PDO is in addition to it. So now you're saying we're doing a little bit of better job integrating the uses, integrating the parking, integrating the design. And I'm just making the argument that we're having a loss of buildings that fronted the streets on both sides, maybe not, and some parking. And now we're exchanging it for some storage. Equal, better, less. And I'm saying, well, we allow storage, so I can't tell you can't do storage in the IH zone. But now it's the design of the storage and the screening elements I think the PDO zone can weigh in on. Does that make sense?
What would be, in your view, the next level beyond that? Nicer than that?
You start going into so an example would be is if we take the SCP theme, the Shorelands Commerce Park theme, we don't want a tall 6-foot fence and 7-foot fences and 8-foot fences because we like that view handling over. But then there's a need also to have security for it. So we start balancing the different type of berming styles and allowing you to do some berming with some fencing and some lighting for security on a limited basis. So that's a Shorelands theme where you're integrating your landscaping and your fencing as your screening element and your security element with if you have to retain, you can set up an area you need to retain. You'll do a partial wall with the retention system with the additional security on top of it. So that's one element. Another element is to get away from the SCP zone and start looking at the upgraded design. So if you go to the Hogan site that we have in the IH zone to the new building, they're doing an upgraded design. A lot of it's matched with the small I want to call it a tilled up wall, but I think it's poured in place and tilled up, but they're integrating columns, a little wider, just a columns, and then some rail and metal fencing. And it gives you that eye that says, yes, I know there's storage behind it, but there's a really nice fence in front of it. That adds to the aesthetic appeal. So that's another way to do fencing is, but if you start looking at all concrete, even the faux concrete rock walls, I don't know what you're up to, but you $90 a linear foot.
Yeah.
And so taking that away, if you do a future building, is a significant expense.
And you lose the visibility that you talked about that you
Mhm.
do like. So
Yeah.
you kind of have to find that balance.
Part of me is a little bit concerned about vinyl. I always, every time anyone puts vinyl in Centerville with the high winds, I'm not super happy about that because it feels like even down there, I used to drive there frequently. And when there's high winds,
everywhere.
it's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah, and this will be, it's vinyl,
Contrast.
but what you have is a chain link, whether it's vinyl coated in a color or not. The chain link usually withstands most of those winds, but those slats get damaged pretty easy, but they can be
Yeah.
replaced too. And then if the fence gets bent because of the weight of the panels, you can fix those sections in the chain link posts.
I just don't feel like that's us in a PDO getting much.
That's,
It feels like it's actually kind of gonna be.
I'll let you have a discussion with them. We've had that discussion down at our level.
Uh-huh.
Okay, other questions for Corey? Oh, okay.
Wait, I'm sorry.
Oh, yes.
Do they have to have a dumpster enclosure?
There's no requirement to have a dumpster enclosure, but I believe they show
They
two.
have one, yeah.
You could zoom in, there's here's, yeah.
Where?
Over by the
Right by the
northwest
building.
of the fleet parking, you'll see a dumpster.
Other
Here?
one. Well,
No,
Oh, yeah.
further, sorry, Jennifer,
Sorry.
further to the right of the picture. You see that dumpster
right
just to the
there.
upper right? And then if you look at the building, you see another dumpster to the,
But do you have any idea of what the enclosure?
the
is?
requirement of the code is to match. So when they come in with final site plan, they have to be compatible with the materials of the main building. And you get to see that. at their main building.
But not like a powder coated chain link fence, not match that material.
Yeah, unless you approve
building.
chain link as a wall decorative element on top of the building. But the ordinance on final will be asked to be compatible with the colors and materials of the
Of the
building.
structure.
Anything else? Nope. All right, we'll go ahead and invite the applicant to come forward and speak and address any of the items that we've talked about, anything that Corey's brought up in the staff report. If you go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. My name is Ken Stewart, with the ownership group of the building. So I think Corey did a great job of summarizing what happened, what transpired. I'll just say at the outset, our objective is to get as many buildings on that site as we possibly can, because that adds to the profitability of the project. And we feel like we'll win the argument in the long run. First of all, the code, the NEC, or not the NEC, but the fire code says that the project area, or the project rather, is limited to 124,000 feet under a cul-de-sac. But the two things that weren't considered in that was, one, as Corey mentioned, we made a wider lanes so that you don't impact egress if one area of the park gets shut off. And the second fact is that it's concrete. And last time I went camping, I didn't stop by the construction site, throw chunks of concrete in my truck. It just doesn't burn. So I think that overall, I think Casey is retiring as the fire chief here in this area.
He's
And so-
actually been replaced.
And I
Met the new
think
fire chief,
we'll have a
or
good chance
Marshall.
of pushing that forward. So that kind of brings us to the main issue here. We think we've done a really good job of presenting very attractive buildings for that area. They're way better than the ones on the south. We actually bought the Bryson building that he referenced there that has the smaller fence You know, the little posts, the Hogan's that, and built them a new building in another area. So the challenge we have is you've got about 4 acres of ground there, and we're limited to 32,000 square feet. Well, on that area, we could easily add another building of that size. So you've got surplus land. So what do you do with that surplus land? Do you let it stay there as weeds? Or do you pave it? Or what do you do? You throw in a bunch of landscaping, and now you're faced with issues with the drought and all the water issues that we're dealing with. And, you know, you kind of have a superfluous amount of landscape. So, you know, we felt it's best to combine it with the existing building that we have, so we can have transmigration between the buildings in terms of parking and outside storage. So our main objective there is to have an aggregate area that we have a tenant that is using that space that's asked us, Intermountain Wind and Solar, where they can park some of their trucks, put some of their, you know, solar panels or whatever else they have that's not objectionable in any way in that area. And we just don't want to go through the expense of installing either masonry or tilt-up concrete or cast-in-place concrete, which is more along the lines of $200 a linear foot now. Okay. Concrete has gone crazy. All construction's gone crazy. We feel like, you know, my wife and I just built a home, and we're debating whether we want to put dryscaping in or regular landscaping. And, you know, she doesn't like the rock because it's full of weeds. And I said to her, I said, look, it doesn't matter what you put there, you have to maintain it. Regardless of whether it's dryscaping or landscaping, it still has to be maintained. And I think the same principle applies with vinyl fencing or chain link fencing with vinyl slats. I think it can look good if you maintain it, you do it properly. And you know, you do some decorative landscaping around. The reason why we want to do that is because we think we're going to ultimately win the argument with the fire department. And you know, when we can sit it down and we can go through the issue and discuss it with them, and we can say, hey, initially, you know, this was approved. We had 136,000 square feet approved in the initial plan. Now you're limiting us to 124,000 feet. It limits what we can do. So we feel like in the long run, we'll get that approval. But in the interim, we'd like to use that space and don't want to go through the expense of installing, you know, masonry or tilt up or cast in place in that area. And then when we get a building approved, have to tear it down. And it'll be just isolated to a small section. The rest of this area will be like we've done in the rest of the park. It'll just be open space. The visual, we like the mountains so you can see them, you know. We do fret a little bit about the landscaping because it was that wild grasses. It looked just like weeds. We'd like to upgrade that a little bit. We agreed to do the picnic area like we talked about in the last planning commission. So we want an attractive environment. We want to attract tenants like Fiat Chrysler that we've got there and others. And you do that by putting up good buildings and presenting them well. So we have every objective, presenting it well. We just don't want to have a big wasted area. So that's where we come from. Appreciate your time. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer if I could.
So I'll jump in with the first question.
Yeah.
So on yard A, you've got a different set of trees and shrubs. Can you walk me through the rationale for why you chose that particular layout?
Well, I think that was to kind of embellish that area because that's where the outside storage would be.
Mhm.
So it provides, you know, like Corey was saying, additional screening. You know, what they're really worried about is vehicular access to their site, wind and solar. I mean, they don't want truck driving up, throwing solar panels in the back of it, driving it, you know. So we felt if we had some natural landscaping and some berms augmented with a fence, maybe along Legacy, that, you know, that would be sufficient for what they're trying to accomplish. So that's why we had a different set there. So that, you know, we could still give them the big boulders that provided, you know, vehicles from driving in there and having free access to it. And then kind of a juxtaposition of that with the fence. So that's what we're looking at.
And is there a security gate, I assume?
There is. So there'd be a security gate right at the cul-de-sac. In fact, there's already one there. We just put it there so nobody drives there for now. So we don't have trucks going and dumping concrete on there. Who knows what. Right out there. So we put some Jersey barriers and some fencing along there so people don't go down.
So yard A itself will not have a security gate?
It will.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it will. It already does.
Okay, I thought when you said the cul-de-sac, I was envisioning something.
Yeah,
farther
there's a
in.
cul-de-sac that right at the edge, right at the fringe of that.
Yeah.
And we put some Jersey barriers and fence in there now to
Got
block
it.
people from.
Thank
entering
you.
that. So they have to dump more garbage on them. like they
Alright.
had in the past. Sure, they'll still find a way to do it.
When you have the approval that you are certain you're gonna get, what is your plan and how is that going to, you said you're gonna tear down the wall that you have for the bus parking. Is that correct?
There is no wall right now.
Not
It's
the
big.
wall, the fence that you were wanting
Oh,
to do?
in the future. So
Yeah.
right now, we've got a 32,000 square foot building. We've got a lease with Intermountain Wind and Solar. I think that's another 3 years. So we've got a few years to work that out. We're gonna let them store their stuff in there temporarily until we can work that issue out.
And that's the bus parking area?
The yard A.
The
Oh,
yard. A.
Yard A.
Yard A.
That would be yard A, yes. And so that's one of the reasons in combining it with building A, because they're a tenant in building A, and in order to do that, they have to be an accessory use. So yeah, that is our plan, is to remove the fence and build a building so it matches the rest of the park,
Mhm.
matches the theme of the rest of the park.
Follow up, it calls for 8-foot
Mhm.
chain link. And I'm guessing that's a security measure.
Yeah, I don't think we have an issue with it if it were 7 feet or, something that's less intrusive. if that's the case.
That's exactly what I was wondering is how comfortable you would be in balancing security with the lines of sight, basically.
Like I said, I mean, the main objective is to stop vehicular access.
Mhm.
And right now you've got the aggregate area between Parish Creek, between Legacy Highway and our development. There's kind of undulations.
Mhm.
So you're not gonna be able to drive a truck in there. And then if the cul-de-sac, if you've got some natural barriers, not Jersey barriers, but big boulders that they can't drive through and a fence, you pretty much secured it. And then you've got the wetlands that surround it. So they either have to drive through wetlands or through a rock to get to there. So
Got
I think we can manage most of this by just very little fencing. And then, when the time comes, hopefully, maybe the fire marshal will stick to his guns and this is a long-term use. Again, our objective is to make as much money as we can. And the way to do that is to put as much square footage as the code will allow us to do that.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Hogan? No? Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, this matter has been scheduled for a public hearing. We will go ahead and open up that public hearing now, and give anybody who would like to come forward and speak. Guessing not. Okay, seeing nobody wishing to come forward, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. Okay, any further questions for staff or the applicant? Are we discussing amongst ourselves?
So my question, Corey, I think you had mentioned earlier about heights of fence in this area. What's standard around there?
The zoning will go 6-foot fence,
Yeah.
but in the industrial and commercial zones, the planning commission can approve up to a 10-foot.
And then in terms of razor or barbed wire, those are forbidden.
It doesn't say.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It
Okay.
actually doesn't say.
Aesthetically?
Not a good idea,
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
unless you're bringing the prison up. from south.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions for Corey or anybody? No? Well, let's just do this. I'll make a motion and then we can talk about it and then talk about specific portions of the motion if we need to. So I hereby make a motion for the planning commission to recommend approval for a plan development overlay amendment for the Parish Creek subdivision lots 1, 3, and 4, subject to conditions 1 through, where'd they go, 5 in the staff report with reasons for action A through F.
I'll second it.
Thank you. So we have a motion and a second. In general, I feel like it's appropriate, obviously, for us to try and work with the property owners in the city to adapt to changing market conditions and whatnot, obviously, within the reasonable expectations of our zoning code and the requirements set out there. And, there's definitely a plan here that, the property owner would like to maximize their investment in it. And I feel like this is a good approach to that. Sounds like they've worked quite a bit with staff and in getting to this point. And hopefully this is something that could pan out. So I'm generally in favor of proceeding with this. This is, Corey, correct me if I'm wrong, this is a conceptual site plan. We'll see a final site plan later,
Yes,
and it does go to the planning, or goes to the city council.
only to the planning commission.
Sounds good. Yeah, so in general, is this a feasible type of a development? I believe so. And we'll see it again in the final, kind of confirm that. So any other thoughts or comments?
Whenever we do something like this, I like to ask myself what it should be, what we're allowing it to be, and then what we're getting in return. And usually when we allow, to change this to have a PDO overlay, the city, the reason why that is beneficial for the developers, because they don't have to meet the requirements that are stated in our code. They have this special overlay where they're allowed to have some flexibility, right? But in return, we as a city recognize if there's something that could be problematic or detrimental to us, they need to take care of that. So I still feel like the screening or the fencing is not my favorite thing. I don't know if it's like a sticker for me, like if I'm feeling really strongly about it because of the situation where they're hoping to, continue to use the land in a way that's different than what they're doing right now. But that happens all the time, where someone puts something in and then they decide, oh, well, this is different, specifically with the change in the market. They thought they were going to want something and then COVID and now something's different. So it is a little bit difficult for me to feel really comfortable giving leniency on what in the future they assume is going to happen, which I'm not going to argue that, but because I don't want to hypothesize about the future, I just want to look at what I have here and decide if they are actually achieving what the PDO should do in this area. And that's where I'm a little bit iffy about the fencing material, because obviously if anything is maintained, it looks better than if it's not maintained, but even still, vinyl slats in a chain link are not as nice as additional fencing.
So you'd like something better than final slats and chain?
I'm trying to decide if I feel passionately about that, but yeah, I don't like
How do
the,
you feel about the vinyl slats and chain link fence with an upgraded landscape? That was an option that Corey had mentioned.
yeah,
Updated landscape around the fence? that what you meant?
Upgraded.
Upgraded.
Yeah,
which is not
staff
what we see here.
recommendation is the option 2 proposal with the upgraded landscaping.
In 3, right? Number 3.
Sorry,
And where's
the-
that?
In the
Um,
recommendations.
recommendations.
So it'll be 2B. Now, if you
Landscaping with
want
fur.
more landscaping, that's a different.
Yeah.
Debate.
I guess I just bring this up to see if anyone else has the same sort of feeling, or if this is something that doesn't really have any legs.
I guess there's a different standard for this kind of a zone than, single family residence and other zones. So it's And I guess, in my view, we apply the industrial standard to it. That's the expectation we have.
Mhm.
I don't have a lot of hard time with it.
So let me make sure I'm understanding you, if you don't mind. So you're saying the standard is chain link with vinyl. We just hold them to the chain link with vinyl.
Even if they're getting a
The
PDO,
rec- Say again?
even if they're getting the PDO benefit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the staff recommendation to upgrade landscaping around it is probably the best thing we can do to upgrade it. So with that combination, I could accept that.
Yeah, I mean, we are still talking about an industrial zone here, right? So,
Well, an industrial zone that has a picnic area and has a nicer, I mean, like it's,
I get it.
I mean, we have in the past required that this is a nice site plan, that we look through the safety, that we look through the walking. We talked at length about for those who were not on the commission, we talked at length about the sidewalk and whether there were, the slatted wood sidewalk or if it was cement, and how it was going to connect with additional trails and walkways in the area. And that is even in an industrial zone, because this is just a different area. This is the Parish, remind me, Corey, Parish Creek subdivision. But that area has different standards than,
But has the vision of the Parish Creek subdivision changed where, pre-COVID, office space was much more in demand, and now everybody's office is their own home, right?
Right.
So vision maybe changes from something that was more of an office park where you go and the picnic areas for people to go and sit at lunch, and there'd be a lot of people doing that type of stuff, to now it is just going to be more truly industrial, and that's why we're storing solar panels and its accoutrements and
Mhm.
so the vision's changed.
definitely. And that's what they meant. That's their argument.
Right, and so that's what I
And
mean.
that's their
like,
argument for the PDO, which again, yeah, that makes sense. I'm just saying, and maybe Corey, can you explain to us, if it's okay, just really briefly, kind of what I was saying, what do they get with the PDO versus basics of what what are we allowing them, and just in broad terms?
What's the
Okay,
trade-off?
so broad
What's the
terms,
trade-off?
look at reasons for action B. That gives you the broad scope. So you'll find that language exactly from the scope of the PDO zone. And so to accomplish that scope, there's elements that obviously are subcategory to it, but to accomplish that scope, we will vary our subdivision and zoning ordinance standards that integrates something better than what we could have done, just dividing up the lots and individual industrial development.
Mhm.
Do you know specifically in this case? anything?
We did the upgraded building design, architecture elements to it. We upgraded our road designs in that project. And we had a landscaping thing with it. That's what we did.
So that's what we got out of it. And do you remember what they got out of it?
Longer cul-de-sac,
That's right, the long cul-de-sac.
more than 400 feet.
So it sounds like maybe I'm the only one that has kind of this concern, so I'm fine, letting it lie, but I just wanted to bring up the fact that I appreciate what they're trying to do, and I appreciate recognizing the need to alter the original approval, and I'm fine with that. I just want us to make sure that we understand that in granting a PDO, it does allow for different, standards than what we've had before, so.
Well, I think that it's absolutely appropriately bring that up. And that's part of the point of the planning commission, is so that we discuss all these various issues and whatnot, and that we don't just approve things blankly. So it's a good point.
Corey, what are the chances of, I know that also in the past, there's been some PDO approvals that have been granted a little bit more leniency, and then the final site plan has shifted from what we've seen before. What sort of leniency beyond allowing them to combine and do all those different things would this open us up to with future unforeseens?
Well, I don't think it sets, I mean, I would reinterpret it, be setting some type of precedence.
Mhm.
I would reinterpret that to try to shorten that up to a precedence level. And, you know, PDOs are individualistic.
Mhm.
So they're gonna base on the circumstances at the time of the approval, what you think is integrated and flexibility. It will be, you know, we've repeated some trails and pathways into this that didn't fully come to fruition, but they, in exchange in a previous amendment, that money was moved over to the 1250 West Trail, which was a better place for the trail. So we have been flexible in adaptation. I don't think it sets a precedence for different projects to have different variations and levels of what you'll consider to it. Industrial high zone. If you look at the PDO, the structure of the PDO, we hit residential really, really, really hard.
Well, and I'm not even looking about future projects. I'm talking about this specific project. Is there anything that is open, this adding, allowing the PDO approval amendment, does it open us up to any unforeseen?
Talking about in future amendments or between now and final?
No, I'm not, I'm truly saying this.
It's
I
all
mean,
dark.
No, but yeah, like, that's what I'm
I'm not
asking.
asking him to,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
to tell the
No, I don't-
future. I know that in previous times, we have approved a PDO, and then we've come back and it has opened us up to a very different final site.
So
plan.
if I
I'm
narrow,
asking
if I
a
narrow your
legitimate
concern
question about if this could do
is if
that.
you allow the outdoor storage, the precedence of how you're going to allow future outdoor storage within the project is setting a precedence that way.
Mhm.
So if additional outdoor storage, it would take an amendment. But if additional outdoor storage will come to fruition for whatever reason, that's probably your major precedence you're setting specific with this project. If somebody comes back in and says, I need additional storage and this is the like that I'm doing. Granted, they have to go through the amendment, but it would be harder to say chain link with slats. And that's why I went for the other condition to try to upgrade the chain link with slats. And that sets that precedence for the future. So
And-
that's your consequence.
And that's what you mean though, like future amendments, right? Like you're not talking about between now and final for this one. Future.
I was talking about now and final for this specific one.
Oh, okay.
Because when I first joined, and to your point, you're wondering why I'm asking this question, which sounds like I'm asking, first of all, I'm not. Because when we joined the planning commission, there were certain things that happened with HAFOCA where, and other situations where we as a planning commission or the previous planning commission approved things, and then there was quite a
For
switch.
example, the high.
Right. So I'm not asking for him to tell the future. I'm asking
Oh.
for if there is anything that we are opening ourselves up for future concerns.
Well, I think that's up to us to decide.
Yeah, you'll get your final site plan and determine whether it substantially complies with this approval.
Yeah, whether it's substantially similar to the conceptual.
Right.
So that's up to us to decide.
I mean, an example is, could it shift where the storage goes? Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, if there's suddenly, you know. whatever.
How much adjustment is defined as substantially non-reflective of the plan? So there's some, but you still have to make the finding that substantially complies with what was approved.
So it's up to us. So I'll just jump in, if that's okay with my rationale. I share Becky's concern. If this were coming in with a promise that this is just a permanent outdoor storage yard, I think I would be looking at it a little bit differently. Right? I'd be looking for something a bit more permanent in a PDO. But we're being promised something, and promises are worth little until they actually are fulfilled. But the thing that gives me some solace is the fact that the interest in actually removing this fence is aligned with the developer's own self-interests.
Right.
Right? It's when those two are opposed with each other that I actually have issues.
Yeah.
So as stated, I actually am in favor of the motion with a couple of tweaks, being that we bring it down to 6 feet and that we put in a no razor, no barb, no security topper. Other than that, I think that we're at a spot in this proposed amendment where even if it ends up as a permanent solution, it's going to be okay. It's in an industrial high. And so I'm taking solace in that.
So Corey, do we have to put a limit to 6 feet if the code already limits it to 6 feet?
You have to receive commission approval to go above 6, so you could stay within parameters and say we want it 6 feet, no raising.
I mean, we can
You
put
can
it
go
in there,
7
and then
feet.
it's- we can put it in there and it's just explicitly, we're just reiterating what's already there.
I don't know what their height proposal is. I don't remember.
I think it was 8.
So you're giving him an 8-foot fence and you could reduce it to 6. I think the applicant made the argument they're looking at vehicular, so a standard 6-foot fence would violate the I-8 zone. And are you okay with going up to 8 feet in proposal, or do you want to drop it back to 6? And then any amendments you see fit that clarify which your expectations are.
Mason, do you want to make an amendment to 3C or add a 3D or however?
It would be an addition. Yeah, let me get over there because I had it written. It would be, here's my proposal and I can make an emotion. Get there. Sorry. Not prepared. Anybody else want to talk about anything else?
Well, Becky, is there something we could do to the fence that makes you feel like it's meets the PDO, which is above and which meets the standard, but it's better? So is there something that you have in mind that we could do to the fence, or the berming or the upgraded landscape? Could you require a tree every 20 feet or every 15 or every 10 or a shrub every 10 or something? Like, is there something that you have in your mind that would make this an improvement?
Well, and I think the point is that I don't want to just willy-nilly just say, do something. I want to look and say that's why I was just asking generally, what is the trade-off that we're receiving? Like, what is the benefit to the city? What is the benefit to the developer? And if there is no real benefit to the city, that's what I was asking. And it was just sort of a theoretical thing. And then does this trade-off in the future open us up to, lowering our standards essentially for future development, but also for this to suddenly for them to turn around and say like, well, actually, we decided we didn't want to do this other thing. And so now we're just gonna leave you high and dry. So I think, as Mason stated, the fact that they are hoping to remove the fence, that's our hope as well. I still don't love the look of it, but I don't know that there's anything, standing out that says this is problematic, other than the fact that I feel like it's not a give and take as much as it usually should be.
The one concession is upgraded landscaping.
Yeah.
That's something the city's getting that wouldn't normally be required, so. Maybe that doesn't satisfy it all, but that's an upgrade.
Yeah.
Mason?
Okay, so I'm going to make a motion that we add 3D and that it be the height of the chain link fence be limited to 6 feet and that no security measures such as razor or barbed wire be used.
I'll second that.
We have a motion to amend and a second. Security measures. Yeah, I think that's okay to limit it to the. I'm just making sure that doesn't prevent security measures like a gate, right?
No, I just meant it on top.
Or like a camera?
Yeah, you can have cameras. Sure. Yeah. I'm just thinking toppers and I don't know security measures well enough, but like spikes or something
Maybe-
like a fiery moat.
I mean, some
Maybe the
fence types do
term-
that.
Hiring road.
Those tire rippers, where you go backwards and they rip up your tires.
All I'm thinking of is that it's unsightly to have those,
Specific
on
to
top.
the fence.
and
Yeah. No, that's
especially in
fine.
this area.
Maybe you
Broken
say something
glass
like
shards,
security
things like
measures
that.
on
Oh,
top of
no,
it.
Sure.
something.
Yes, your
Okay, let's,
bottles.
Lisa, can we just make a little quick change to his motion to amend? Or do we have to make a motion to amend his motion to amend?
Well, he wants to just add that clarification.
I'll do that. So
Great.
here it is rephrased. The height of the chain link fence be limited to 6 feet and that no security measures on top of the fence be used, such as razor or barbed wire.
Great. Okay. I like that. You good with that?
Yep.
Perfect. Okay, any discussion to Mason's motion to amend? No? Okay, let's go down here for, this is just the motion to amend, not the whole thing. Just adding 3D.
Aye.
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 It'd be funny if I said nay.
Logan
Aye.
Johnson used to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a Logan move.
On second thought.
All right, that motion passes. So now we have the amended motion with a 3D.
The other thing that's nice about that is also that it prevents like long-term, maybe the potential long-term use of that, which is also something that is not what we want to have happen. So I appreciate that.
Anything else? So then back to the original motion as amended, and let's go ahead and vote on this one. First, start on this side again.
Aye.
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 I,
Great, that motion passes. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you again for the final site plan and making some progress on it. Okay, let's go ahead and move along. We've got our community development director's report, city council report, goals, all of the above. Corey?
Sure. Thanks, Chair Daly. What we did, and I informed the chair for this meeting, is that we took the items from our last meeting, and rather than just rescheduling for this meeting, we moved them to your July 27th meeting. That is the single-family lot development on an unplatted parcel and review of the moderate income housing strategies. The reason being is we did not receive applications in time to make that agenda and the noticing. So it seemed like that would keep you reasonably busy, particularly with the MIH strategies. So we don't miss that deadline with them. So if you're okay with it, we'd like to hold your 27th meeting with those two items. The city council, nothing's gone to them recently that's a land use action. So I didn't find anything in their agenda history. I've been to their meetings a lot, but I don't know if you want to know about employee compensation stuff. But so our planning commission goals, the parking update, they've tabled it to a little bit of further study, like ground truthing, I would call it. It's just the bandwidth of keeping up with things right now, taking over enforcement and permits and so forth. So sometime we'll get back to that. Subdivision ordinance, we need to incorporate the updates still. Maybe we'll hit that unplatted single family lot next meeting. Landscaping ordinance updates. This is the clarification of maybe we need to tone our expectations of the plantings, like we require 75% plantings now, maybe it should be reduced. Look at some other things like that. I think this will also spin off into the artificial turf definition matter. And then the general plan economic update, we didn't get that funding. There is budget that was put in the preliminary budget or the tentative budget till we have the truth and taxation of 60,000, but that's reduced by 20,000. So we'll have to decide what our scope is or if we can compete again. I did call on the applications because I was a little concerned that what did we miss? And it was really hard for either entities to use general plans for the expenditure of the funds. They're tough to get them to do a general plan unless there's a specific goal that either Wasatch Front's trying to accomplish or UDOT's trying to accomplish. And we just, so they said, try again, which was the PR thing. We
Okay.
want to take care of you.
Better
we're
luck
just-
next time.
and better luck
Yeah.
next time. So that's where we're at.
Okay. Thanks, Corey. So for the July 27th meeting, I will not be here for that one, but Becky's gonna be here and she'll be running the show. So, if anybody else is gonna be missing, let us know. All right, let's move on then to.
Is anyone else gonna be missing?
Yeah, is anybody else gonna be missing on the 27th? It's not, this is awesome. We have a full commission here. This is great. I love it. Okay, so just me. All right, then let's go talk about some minutes from our June 8th meeting. All right, does anybody have any recommended changes or adjustments on page 1? Page 2? Page 3? Page 4? Page 5? Heavy duty page 5. Okay. I'll make a motion to accept the minutes without any amendment.
A second.
Great, all together, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, we're adjourned.